I'm here today with Rachael Falk, CEO of the Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Centre. Thanks very much for being here with us today, Rachael.
Thanks for having me.
You took up the role as CEO about 12 months ago. Can you tell us a little bit about what the CRC does and what your focus has been for the past year?
So cooperative research centres have actually been a government initiative for the last 20, 25 years. And the idea was that government wanted to co-invest with industry so that we could have government sort of fueling, if you like, industry-led problems by way of contributing Commonwealth money, along with also bringing in our universities, so that the all parties involved in solving sort of big issues would work together collaboratively. It's majority of funding is through the Commonwealth at the moment, and as I said, it's industry-led. Cybersecurity is quite an unusual one for a CRC because often they've actually been more scientific, single focus, like feral pests, or at the moment there's an autism one, cancer, sort of quite single focus ones. Our one is cybersecurity, a very big issue. And in fact, we kind of have a very big mandate. So we have currently 24 industry, government and university partners. And it's really about helping them articulate their problems from the government industry perspective, and then using our great university researchers to help solve those problems.
And so are there particular trends or areas of focus that you're looking at the moment?
Yes, there are. We're looking at sort of at 2.5 main themes. Critical infrastructure is important, and sort of all that comes with securing critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And the other thing we're looking at is cybersecurity as a service, which is a strange kind of name to mean kind of commercial-based or commercial-grade enterprise-based products that we can put into a small business or a larger business to solve sort of a known problem. And the third sub-theme that's emerging at the moment is around law and policy and regulatory issues. So we're looking at a whole bunch of, and we've got lots of problems we could look at, as you know, a whole bunch of issues that need to be explored, both from a policy discourse perspective, but also what are the legislative requirements or unintended consequences of the world we're moving into with cybersecurity and all things connected.
And so what are some of the challenges that you see nowadays with the existing design of our regulatory framework in this space?
Like, I think the challenges are often a little bit like what we've talked about this morning: unintended consequences, not bringing affected organisations on the journey. So the encryption legislation changes to that were a little bit about perhaps not working with existing stakeholders to really help them understand how they could assist in sort of the national security agenda. It wasn't about, I think, intrusion and what they could do. So some of the challenges can simply be getting what I'll call newer organisations to have a social responsibility in some sense. Some of the challenges can be also around we didn't think this legislation or this policy would work in this way, so what do we need to do to fix it? And others are kind of that more social discourse around what kind of society do we want to live in. A great example is AI. Where do we want, or machine learning, where do we want human beings to step in and make decisions, or where are we as a society content for some decisions to be made automatically in the future, and they probably are today, but bigger, more decisions that are quite substantial. When do we think humans should step in, and when are we ceding control? And I think that's a really big ethical, legal issue. And are we prepared to kind of face the consequences of some of those decisions?
And what do you think, if you imagine the sort of pie chart division here, what role do you think should regulation play with some of these issues versus the role of organisations themselves, or even just industry?
Traditionally, Australia sometimes have been a bit more sort of prescriptive, and I think the ACCC with the recent report is brilliant that they're being quite detailed about not only where they see regulatory reform happening, but what they want to see a legislative landscape look like. And I think that's good. I think there's a time and a place for that. I certainly think we've got enough. I think we've got enough examples in that world of privacy breaches and customer expectations and privacy statements to now know, I think, that the practices we're seeing aren't the future for us. We don't want that kind of world. But it's, I think, a tension that constantly has to be reassessed. And you might find, in 10 to 15 years' time, the regulatory settings are quite different. But at the moment, I think there's been a little bit of a wait and see, watch and see. We've had our hands off what's actually happening. And we now realise there are real consequences to a whole range of sort of behaviours that need to be reined in. And I think that is kind of a bit of a faster reaction than we've seen, but the natural ebb and flow of society and a democratic society.
And so, final question, in the interim where there is a gap between what we have now and the potentially increased level of intervention that we have from government and regulators in this space, what are the things that organisations, or what are the key things that you think organisations should be doing in this space to deal with some of the consequences that we were talking about earlier?
I think in terms of use of data and public trust and consumer trust, I think irrespective of where the law's at, a company's board should always say, is this fundamentally what our customers would think they're giving licence to us to do with their data? Even if our privacy statement is very broad, fundamentally, if we step back, do we really think that's what they trust us to do? And I think that's a really strong ethical question that all boards should be looking at. And even though it's a difference between, I suppose, verdict and sentencing. You can have a verdict, might be and reflected your behaviours and sort of the consequences are reflected on sentencing. So I think just because you can do it, and it even might be legal, is it something you should be doing? And I think that ethical framework should always come into the boardroom around legally we might be able to do that with data, but is that the social licence, is that contract we really have, and when I mean contract, the broader contract that our customers think they have with us, or if not, how do we get it out there in a way that we're really transparent about what we want to do and we sort of take the temperature on the comfort with our customers? I always think in the interests of, or the interim where we're living in that ambiguity without legally something being possible, values can guide boards, and that to me, I still come back to the sort of the front of the Sydney Morning Herald, it's probably very old fashioned, the front of, I don't know, online news, that test, will we want to read about our company doing that? And it coming on all the news feeds and everything, is that the company we want to have? And I think that temperature check can happen at the board, culturally it can happen right through a company, and you don't need the law to tell you to do that. That's about good governance and acting responsibly as a director.
Good rule for life.
That's right.
Thanks very much for being with us today, Rachel.
Thanks for having me.